Good afternoon. My name is Zach Davis. I am the Stop and School to Prison Pipeline Program Manager for Best Starts for Kids, part of Department of Community and Human Services. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on the Stop and School to Prison Pipeline Community Supports 2019 RFP. We will be getting started here. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And just to give you a heads up, we are recording this, so if there's any particular details that you miss, don't worry. This is all being recorded and you'll be able to view it again. Additionally, we're going to hold off on any questions until the tail end of the presentation, just so that we can get through all of the information. And then at that point in time, we'll unmute on our end, and we'll just remind you to make sure and unmute on your end so that we can hear you. Okay, so I'll get started here. So as I mentioned before, as you can see in this first slide, this is a Community Supports 2019 RFP information session. And we'll be covering a number of items. One, what is Best Starts for Kids? Two, a brief overview of Stop and School to Prison Pipeline strategy area, including what are school to life success pathways. A brief overview of the Community Supports 2019 RFP, where to find data and how to use it. Zoom grants, basically how to apply, and questions and answers will be towards the tail end. So as you'll see in the RFP and in this slide, the vision for Best Starts for Kids is we want to see babies born healthy, kids thrive, and young people grow up to be happy, healthy, successful adults. In terms of how we do this, there are four major components: promotion, prevention, early intervention, policy, and systems change. And I want you to pay particular attention to the systems change component as we talk a little bit more about this RFP. In terms of approach, we want to support community-based organizations, local governments, schools, and other nonprofits to provide opportunities primarily for young women of color and all Latinx, Indigenous, youth and young adults ages 12 to 24 to enhance, one, their commitment to school, two, completion of and graduation from high school or post-secondary education, or successfully gain employment. There's a fourth component that I want to talk a little bit about, and that is the focus on positive cultural identity development, and I'll walk through that a little bit later. What makes Stop the School to Prison Pipeline strategy area unique? Well, there are a number of aspects of this strategy area that are unique, and then there's other aspects that I think are indicative of the other strategy areas for Best Starts for Kids. One is the equity and social justice lens, and that's something that I want to particularly be able to emphasize, is that when we talk about equity and social justice change, we're not just talking about on an individual or service level, we're also talking about how we as a system and as institutions, how do we operate and how are we contributing to the greater effort of equity and social justice. Two, age and population focus. So this strategy area is open to youth and young adult focused programming ages 12 to 24. So youth and young adults with a high potential or risk currently or were involved in the criminal legal system and or other systems or harms such as foster care, homelessness, sex trafficking, perhaps dealing with an IEP or a 504. This funding primarily focuses on young women of color. That being said, we also understand that some programming may be working with young men of color or young men or co-ed, but the important thing is and part of what we're focusing on with that particular, when we say young women of color, is it's not only services and support and the shifting of the way that we operate as a system in order to effectively support young women of color. It's also how are we addressing issues around sexism and the way in which men treat women. And so if you have a program that's working with young men around sexism or promoting anti-sexism, that's something that can be just as applicable. Because sexism, I think at its core, is not an issue for women. I think it impacts women, but it's really an issue that's really having to do with what's going on for men. And then the other component, and there was some confusion around this, we want to make it clear when we talk about all Latinx and Indigenous youth and young adults, that's not a subset of young women of color. That's talking about all Latinx young men and women, Latinx, Indigenous youth and young adults. And the community supports, there was some confusion from the last RFP, so we just want to elaborate a little bit on that. We're talking about services that provide three major components: relationship, guidance, and resources. Historically, that is also included what some folks commonly refer to as outreach and case management. We've had conversations with youth and young adults in the community, and they have expressed their dissatisfaction with the terminology of case management. They're not cases to be managed. Additionally, in terms of that human relationship, it's not something that's for a lot of them regarded as outreach, but more so understanding that it's the building of the relationship and providing guidance. And so we wanted to open up the possibilities for what that could look like instead of having this narrow scope of work. And so some examples of that could be support groups, healing circles, educational workshops. And if you want a little bit clearer definition of what we mean by some of these terms, please look at the glossary of terms that's provided with the RFP. And I want to emphasize this enough. It's important for you to go through all the details of the RFP because I think that it does a much better job of articulating some of what we're talking about. In terms of the goals for the overall strategy area, I just wanted to briefly go through those. Replace the school to prison pipeline with school to life success pathways. Again, take a look at the RFP glossary of terms if you want to better understand what we mean by school to prison pipeline and when we talk about the terms school to life success pathways. Second one is eliminate the practice of putting youth and young adults in confinement. Third one is support healing the traumatic wounds experienced by youth and young adults of color and their families, and align county policies and practices with community efforts and needs. Enhance capacity building for our partners to support them as they help create sustainable school to life success pathways. And when we talk about enhanced capacity, we're not just talking about improving services or contributing to the growth of services. We're also talking about how we can support our partner providers so that they're competitive for future funding opportunities. And then the last one is support the building of a community-led network within the King County region that protects and supports school to life success pathways for our youth and young adults and their families. So what we're essentially talking about is how do we create a critical mass of support that spans across all the relevant areas so that no matter where a youth and young adult and their family reside, there's going to be support there in place for them. It's also good to talk about guiding principles because that is something that we want to be held accountable to as a strategy area, but then also it's important to consider whether that's in alignment with your principles as an organization should you apply for this funding. So the first one is prioritize and champion the voices and choices of communities most affected by racism and poverty. Second one is foster equitable access to decisions and resources. Learn from and help grow with community service providers. So what we're talking about with that particular principle is the importance of having a learning community. It's not this paternalistic position that we have, but rather is us learning with the folks whom we partner with. The next one is invest in culturally reflective and responsive supports, and build on healing-centered practices and comprehensive approaches. Some of the terms we use around that are also like holistic services and provision. Next one is increase youth and young adults' positive cultural identity development, self-worth, and leadership skills. So I just want to clarify a little bit. When we talk about positive cultural identity development, it's helping these youth understand a little bit about their ancestral heritage, for them to find a certain level of support in that, and ways that often the dominant culture won't necessarily affirm those things or misrepresent them. We understand that part of a person's ambition and dreams stems from a sense of self-worth, and so how do we help build that up? You can provide somebody with a job and you can provide them with an education, but it's really hard to sustain those things if the youth doesn't have a sense of ambition, which all too often is connected to having dreams, having a sense of worth. And so we want to be able to support them in that and reflect that for them. And that also includes leadership skills. That these youth and young adults are the next generation, or in some cases currently are leaders for us. And so how do we support them? And then also how do we strengthen ourselves so that we are in a position to support them? And then the next one is promote solidarity and trust. Again, that's about building a critical mass to really be able to move the needle in terms of systemic change. And then the last one is develop anti-racist and anti-sexist practices leadership, and systems. So again, it's not enough just to provide services. It's also how are we, in terms of us as providers, as systems people, public servants, how are we changing the way in which we operate so that we are honoring those who are most impacted. Funding specifics. We expect to fund at a range level of up to $640,000. That's, to clarify, that is for individual applications. In the case of if you want to do a collective application, and if you want a more elaborate definition of what we mean by collective application, please take a look at the RFP. The maximum amount for a collective application is $815,000, and that is for 2 or more organizations who are partnering together for that particular application. And we want to make it very clear that for each of those organizations, there isn't necessarily a budget cap amount in terms of their annual budget, but those who have an annual organization budget individually for each of the partners in the application, not for the entire group of partners, but for each partner's individual annual organizational budget. If it's $500,000 or less, we definitely want to encourage you to apply for that collective application. And we don't know how many applications we anticipate funding because we don't know how much folks are going to be asking for in terms of their budget request. So you can see here from the timeline that we've had 2 workshops already, and we'll be providing the questions and responses from those workshops on our Zoom Grants frequently asked questions section there. So if you're concerned about what were the discussions, we can provide you with all that information. Hopefully we'll provide that, have that posted by the end of this Friday. And as you can see here, the final data request, technical assistance consultant, is February 25th. And the proposals themselves are due March 11th, 2019 by 11:59 p.m. Late responses will not be accepted. What we mean by that is if you end up having to submit it and it's midnight, meaning it's 12 a.m., it didn't go through. We have to be very firm about this in order to be fair for all of the folks who have taken the time to compete for this RFP. And I want to encourage, remind folks to not wait until the last minute to submit their RFP, because in the past, people have experienced technical difficulties in terms of the platform, the Zoom Grants platform, perhaps because there was a lot of people trying to upload at the same time. So please don't wait until the last minute. We strongly encourage you to have all of your information, your application submitted way in advance as possible. And if you need any assistance around that, Reginald will walk through what that assistance will look like later on in this presentation, as well as we'll talk a little bit about technical assistance and how important it is to access the technical assistance. One of the most common things that we saw in terms of factors for those who did not receive funding or were not awarded, when I noticed that a lot of those folks did not access technical assistance. And we want to encourage folks, regardless if they feel confident or not, regardless if they think they should be accessing or not, to just take some time to at least meet with one of our technical assistance consultants to make sure that you've got all your bases covered and that they can provide you with any additional guidance and insight. And we will be going through a selection process through March through April, and we'll be doing interviews sometime in May, and then we'll go through the notice of, we'll provide folks with a notice sometime in June. We haven't provided specific dates because we wanted to provide ourselves a little bit of flexibility just in case we need more time. The orientation, however, for those who are awarded will be during the week of June 10th. So please try to keep your schedule during that week as clear as possible until you've been notified as to whether you were selected or not. And again, we anticipate or are scheduled to have these contracts in play by August 1st. So that means that we are going through negotiations and we have the contract solidified, and the contracting period starts August 1st, 2019. In terms of the rating criteria, some of the things that we take into consideration is the population and geographic focus. So that's something that you're going to want to be mindful of, explaining to the reviewer, to us who are doing the reviewing. Now, just to be clear, I and Reginald as the program manager and the contract monitor will not be doing scoring. We'll just simply be facilitating the conversations around the scoring. And some of what we'll be looking at is who do you plan on serving and working with, and where do you plan on doing it? Is there a demonstration of equity and social justice lens in terms of how your organization is structured, how you anticipate this program will contribute to the larger effort around dismantling and replacing the school-to-prison pipeline with school-to-life success pathways, and additionally, what do those services look like? And it'll be helpful to demonstrate whether you have a clear understanding of the social historical context in terms of the work that you're providing and whom you're providing it for or with. Community engagement. How are you engaging youth and young adults and other community members, family members, for example? How are they involved throughout the process? And I'm not talking about just providing the services, but how are they involved with the designing of the program or the proposal? Were you able to help were you able to collaborate with them in that process? And again, I want you to take into consideration the alignment of our long-term goals for the strategy area and the principles, so that at the very least there isn't a conflict there, because if so, that may lead to issues down the road. So you have to ask yourself and do some soul searching around whether this is partnering with us is a good fit and is in the best interest of your organization. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that your goals as an institution, as an organization, and your principles have to be completely lined up with ours. But at the very least, we would hope that you would try to avoid any sort of conflict of interest there. And then a clear programmatic focus and goals within the time frame. We understand that some programs may have a time frame that's much longer than the 29 months that is expected for this particular RFP. That being said, you can walk us through what those 29 months would look like, and you can feel free to talk a little bit about the larger time frame so that we have some context. And then lastly, are the goals achievable per the budget request? What we mean by that is it's important for you to make sure that you are submitting a budget that's going to accurately reflect what you need. Some people think that they may have a better chance of getting an award if they lowball their program in terms of the budget. That actually may compromise your possibilities of being competitive for this RFP. So we encourage you to make sure that you are providing an equitable and suitable salary for your staff, and to take into consideration anything such as stipends for the youth, providing enough money to be able to fulfill the programmatic aspects of your proposal. These are things that you're going to want to be very careful about. And again, it's a great opportunity to partner with our technical assistance consultants, which is listed in the attachment 4 of the RFP. They will be able to help serve as a sounding board and provide some insight around whether, in fact, the budget that you have is equitable and is realistic. So here are the list of folks, just in case you haven't seen the attachment 4, number 4 in the RFP. And feel free to reach out to any of these folks. We ask that you not try to work with more than one, and that's a request that they have made. So if you are working with any particular technical assistance consultant, that you, unless you're having some sort of issues with that particular consultant, that you would just stick with one as opposed to trying to work with multiple in order to, quote unquote, get a second opinion. So I'm now going to hand the video presentation over to Sarah J, who's going to talk a little bit more about the data and evaluation component. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And thank you, everybody, again, for joining us on the webinar today. I'm going to talk about two different aspects of data. Firstly, ideas for incorporating compelling data into your application, your proposal, and then also give you an idea of what to expect about evaluation and reporting if you are funded. So our data and evaluation team has 3 guiding principles that we hope you'll see reflected in our work together: partnership, collaboration, and accessibility. Some important things to know about the evaluation approach to this work is that we will be asking all Best Starts for Kids funded partners to participate in performance measurement and reporting. It's really important to us to hold ourselves accountable to our electorate and to the community about what we're achieving with the funds that they have elected to give us through this voter-funded initiative. And so that we can learn as we go, lift up best practices, and highlight our successes. So evaluation is important. We expect all the funded partners to participate in that with us. That being said, we'll work together with you to develop an evaluation plan if you do receive funding. So you don't need to worry about developing that now at the application stage. We also know that many organizations are burdened by very different data collection requirements from lots of different funders, and so whenever it's feasible, we will work with you to build on the capacity that you already have and what you're already reporting, what's important to you, instead of just duplicating efforts. So right now, participating in this webinar, you're probably thinking about how you're going to put together a proposal for this RFP. I think that using data can be a really compelling way to help you tell your story to the reviewers. There's going to be a really diverse group of reviewers. As I think Zach already mentioned, they will all go through equity and social justice training prior to reviewing the proposals that we receive for this. But they won't all know what you know about your program and your community. And what your proposal is an opportunity to tell that story to them in a compelling way. Whatever you believe about your community's power and potential and your organization's potential for success, that belief's based on information that you see every day in your work. And data can be a way for you to communicate that information to reviewers. So think about what's that story you want to tell in your proposal, and then what's the data that can help back that up for reviewers. Now, when I say data, numbers are often the first thing that come to people's mind, quantitative data. And that's great, that can be really important and powerful, but it's certainly not the only kind of data that Best Starts for Kids values. I'll show you some of the quantitative data that we're putting out there, but when you think about your proposal, you might also find that pictures or stories or quotes, qualitative data that you have from your communities might be just as helpful, if not sometimes more helpful in telling that story. And that certainly will be valued by reviewers as well. Zach went through all of the different rating criteria, and you'll see that like throwing some numbers, some stats in there isn't one of them. So use it if you think it's helpful to your story. Another idea that can be really powerful is to combine different sources of data. Maybe you do find a number that speaks to an issue in your community, and you have a story or a quote that really highlights the meaning or the impact of what that number is talking about. That can really help reviewers see why that issue is important or what the power of the program that you're proposing can be. Of course, we do ask that if you choose to tell a story or use a quote from somebody in your community or somebody that you work with, you tell a story in a way that they would like their story to be told and respect their confidentiality. But with those guidelines in mind, that can be some of the most powerful kinds of data to consider including in your proposal. So once you get through the proposal phase, if you are selected for funding, there will be different types of data that we collect from our partners, stories and pictures as well as numbers, and they have different processes. So again, I'll give you just a sneak peek of what you can expect around that. King County is building a database, the Client Outcomes Reporting Engine, that will be an online portal where grantees or partners will be able to submit their client-level data securely. And that will be across all of the Department of Community and Human Services initiatives. We're really hoping that this is a great asset to us and to you as well, because you'll be able to have your data checked automatically. When you enter it, you'll be able to access everything that we access. You can look at the same dashboards that your program managers here look at. And having that line level data can really help us make sure at King County, are we serving communities equitably? Are our resources going to where the needs are? So that is something you can anticipate coming on board at some point during the timeline of this contract, but it's not available yet. So in the meantime, just skip ahead because I think we're going to talk about In the meantime, you'll have some structured spreadsheets, and your program managers and your evaluator will work with you on developing those. You'll have program measures to report on that you will identify as a group collaboratively if you're funded. In addition to the quantitative data, we will be asking every 6 months to share some narrative data, some stories. And there's a few key questions that we ask, pretty basic. What's a success? What's a challenge? What, if any, changes have you made? What, if any, policy, systems, and environment changes have you worked towards? And what is any story that you'd like to share with us? So that's a little bit of what you can plan for around evaluation. Again, another reminder there is that we want to fully fund the cost of what it takes to operate these programs, and so that's going to be staff time to collect and put together that data for us. So keep that in mind when you think about staffing capacity that you might need or other resources that you might need to successfully do the program that you would like to do. I'm going to take a minute now to talk about some of the data that King County is making available. You may or may not find this useful at all for your program, but we like to make sure that everybody knows that it's there. One of the values that I highlighted at the beginning is accessibility. So we want to make sure everyone has a chance to see what this is. Now, hopefully I can go ahead and present the right monitor here. The original. I think it's presenting this. Just open Explorer there.
That's okay.
Yeah, I know it's not offering monitor 3. Thank you very much for your patience. We're trying out a new system for popping in and out of our PowerPoint presentation here. Okay. So once again, this is some of the data that King County is making available. You should not feel that you have to use it if it's not helpful to you, but we like to know, or we like everybody to know that it's out there in case you are curious or want to check it out. And so also that you can see what are some of these big picture indicators that Best Starts for Kids is taking a look at. In the RFP, you'll see linked this Best Starts for Kids indicators site. And this is a collection of data points that we're looking at for communities all across King County. So it's not something that any one program or even any one strategy is responsible for moving the needle on, but it's how we monitor, how's King County doing on these issues? Has it changed since Best Starts for Kids has started getting implemented? So you can search, you can look by certain age groups. I'm going to go ahead and search school. I'll warn you that our search bar function is not always really helpful because it will only search exactly what you've put up there. So if I search school and the indicator text says education, it might come up. So it might not come up, that is. So poke around. And again, Zach mentioned that TA providers are available to you, and if you are interested in finding some data or having any trouble finding data that's relevant to your application, that's a great resource to start with. The TA providers can do a great job of helping you find that and helping you navigate this. Really, my goal here today is just that everybody knows what's out there, so they know it's a resource and can choose if it's something they want to use. So I'm going to take for an example education and employment among young people ages 16 to 24. When you click those indicators, you'll get taken to an interactive visualization of the data. Usually the first thing you'll see is a map, and sometimes there's some text that'll kind of spell it out what you're looking at. We pulled together data from a lot of different sources for these indicators, so what that map might look like could be really different, and we try to break it down and share it with you in as much detail as we can because we know that people really want to know what's going on in their specific community. When we can, for example, we show neighborhood level indicators. For this one, because of where we get the data from, we can only look at Seattle versus the rest of King County. So you'll often see a map on the front page, and then if you look at these tabs, you can see different demographics. Again, we try to provide language when we can. We show more detailed race and ethnicity groups when we can, but this data source just has your basic race and ethnicity groups. The other thing you can take a look at if you're curious is trends. So how is this changing over time, and how is it changing for different groups? So that's a little bit of how to use our visualizations. Once again, if you are trying to figure this out, the TA providers are a great resource for you. The other data source I want to highlight that might be relevant to this RFP in particular is the Zero Youth Detention Data Dashboard. If you've seen the Zero Youth Detention report that came out recently, a lot of the same data is in here. But if you're looking for numbers specifically around criminal justice in King County, you can find it in this dashboard, and it's broken down by race and ethnicity as well. So I think this is laid out a little bit more simply than some of the other indicators, but this is just an example of what you'll find if you poke around. There's a lot of data in here. And again, just narrowing it down, TA can be a great resource. You might not want to use this data. You might have your own data. I always think that often organizations' own data can be the most powerful, just to show what are the successes that you've had. You might have data that shows how your leadership really represents the community that you work in, and things like that. So I think with all that being done, is it your turn, Reginald? Awesome, great. I'm gonna hand it back to Reg. This isn't going to your screen. So.
There you go. So we'll go ahead and get started with the Zoom Grant section here. Let me get this screen up for you. So when you pull up this PowerPoint on the website on Zoom Grants, you can also see the link for recordings for other data assistants, as well as we mentioned, that this will be recorded in general for you to pull up. So in terms of Zoom Grants is an online application system where we'll be moving a lot of our RFP processes to this location. And the good thing is when you log in, if you've used Zoom Grants for other applications, you'll be able to use it as well for this one. So 4 key things you'll want to know. So the Zoom Grants University, when you are working on your application, there's a search engine where you can pull up a lot of different information around questions that you may have for troubleshooting. The autosave feature, anytime you type into a field and you go to click outside of that field, you will see a green light automatically flash on your screen that says save. If that button continues to blink and you continue to see that over and over again, that means it is not saving. And at that point, you more than likely would want to call Zoom Grants if you are already not working with a TA that can help you troubleshoot that. The tab system essentially means that you won't be going from one page to another working on this application. You'll be actually clicking on tabs just as you would in a web browser to go from one aspect of the application to another. And then lastly, check for completion. When you do go to submit, Zoom Grants will let you know whether or not all the elements were provided. So for instance, in the Documents tab, there is a requirement to upload a document for one of the questions. Also in the Documents tab, if you've done a collective application, there's a requirement for you to upload multiple budgets based off of how many folks are a part of that collective application. So when you're reading through this tutorial, know that the orange numbers will go with the sequential instructions and that the blue and green letters will give you extra notes. I'll go through parts of this to get you acclimated, but you can always return to these slides to get more information on Zoom Grants. So in terms of getting started, in order to submit an application, you must have a Zoom Grants account. You won't go directly to Zoom Grants to get started. What you'll do is you'll go directly to the BSK blog to find the Stopping School to Prison Pipeline link, and you'll be able to access Zoom Grants that way. If you go directly to Zoom Grants and try to log in and find this application, you will not be able to find it that way, unless you do need to go through the blog to get to the page that you are viewing now. Once you create an account, it will give you the access that you're looking for, and if you already have an account, you would just be able to log right into that by going through the link again, and it will pull up this new application for you. So in terms of visually what to expect, the number one, where you can see the contact admin tab, that is if you have reached out to your TA, you've already called and talked to Zoom Grants about any technical issues, and you've already tried the activity log, that's the button that you would click, if nothing is really working out for you. I'll show you the activity log later, which is where you'll be able to reach out to our team directly and post questions that we will later on put out for you on the FAQ. The FAQs will come out weekly on Fridays, and they will be organized by date, so you'll be able to see at what point were questions responded to. You'll also receive a response from our team saying that we have received your question and that it will be showing up on the next for the next FAQ. So if you're not seeing a response from us, that'd be a great reason to click on the contact admin button after you utilize the activity log. The letter A is just showing you where all those tabs are. So when you have this full screen blown up, you won't have the black visuals that you have on these slides. It'll just be that white and grayish screen and when you sign on, you'll probably see a little bit more orange on your screen as well. So if it looks a little bit different, don't fear, you are in the right place. And then in terms of the letter B, where the print preview is, if you ever want to look at your application as a whole on paper or on screen, or if you want somebody to edit it and they want to edit it by hand, etc., you are able to print various aspects of your application from that point of view. So taking a deeper look into one of the tabs, the budget tab, for instance, will have instructions for you inside of a yellow box letting you know how to work the budget. The letter A points out where the total is. If you don't see the total on your screen, that just mean that you need to scroll down. But when you're putting in your budgets for the program as a whole, as well as individual budgets and salaries, you will be able to see this total here on the screen. The document where you upload your budget, that won't have an automatic totaling function, so you'll want to make sure that you're providing that as well. So in terms of submitting your application, when you submit, you want to click the Submit Now button. The thing to keep in mind is that button is not at the top of your page. It's going to be aligned with all the tabs that coincide with the application. So you'll have tabs that may say Summary, Application Questions, Budget, etc. That's where you're going to find that Submit Now button. Right underneath that as well is the activity log, which I mentioned before, which we'll be discussing soon. Also, as you look at the red writing that you should see on the presentation right now, that's letting you know whether or not there is an issue with your application. So it would let you know, hey, this question is not done. You need to go back to blank section to submit. Same thing. If you're noticing it's a technical issue, check in with Zoom Grants. If it's a content thing and maybe you're not sure if you missed something or not and you need some support, check in with your TAs. And then lastly, checking in with us through the activity log to see if we need to fix anything through the FAQs. So then lastly, when you go back to log on to your account, or let's say you get logged out, when you go back the second time, the third time, so on and so forth, you can go directly to the Zoom Grants site. You do not have to go back to the BSK site, the BSK blog, and go through the link in that way. You also are able to set up other folks to work with you on your application. So same thing, after they go through the BSK blog the first time and get logged in, they no longer have to go there. They can go directly to the Zoom Grants page. When they are on that page, in the top left where the number 1 is, that's where you'll be able to update and change any account information. So for whatever reason, if somebody's working on it and they're no longer going to be working on the application and you want to change who that person is, that's where you change that information. Where the number 2 is, that's going to show any of your open applications or completed applications. So some applicants may have already applied for another RFP on Zoom grants or currently have a contract with us, if you see those up there, make sure that you're opening the 2019 RFP and you don't get that confused with the 2018 or any other RFPs. So in terms of support, the three key things you're going to want to stay on top of are, one, the library tab. So the library tab is going to have all the elements of the RFP, all the attachments, your FAQs, the links that you need for questions, and all those you'll be able to open and look at and print, etc. And that's going to give you all the information that you need to complete this application. Technical assistance, that's going to be one of the attachments in your library, and that will have bios of the different folks who will be providing technical assistance for you for free. So definitely check that out. And then the activity log button. You'll be using this instead of the Contact Admin button, and I'll show you how that works now. So when you click the activity log button, which is going to be right below the Submit Now button, you'll want to click Grant Maker Action Required, which will then send our team a message telling us that we need to read your comment and reply to it. And that's where I said we would actually put in a message saying, yes, we have received that. And that will show up on your screen where the activity log is. When you type in the activity, when you type in your entry, go ahead and just click Add once. If you click it multiple times, it will continue to show up and send multiple emails. Know that when we get that email, we will comment back on your activity log. So if you don't see us respond immediately after or that same day, check back in the morning. And if you don't see us responding after 48 hours, acknowledging that you've put something on activity log, feel free to contact admin because maybe there's a technical issue. And we will be transitioning over into the question sections now. So whether you have a question that is focused on the RFP itself, which Zach started us off with, the evaluation aspect, which Sarah J went into, or the Zoom grants portion, feel free to start sending in your questions now through the text portion on Skype, or if you're over the phone, you will be able to ask your question that way as well, and we'll bring Zach back up and we'll move forward with unmuting everyone so that we can have that portion begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah J. and Reginald, for providing us with that information. So again, my name is Zach Davis, Stockton School to Prison Pipeline Program Manager. And I am going to unmute folks on our end, but please be sure to unmute on your end as well. And again, we'll be receiving questions either via the chat box or via the phone. Is it working?
Somebody just asked a question.
Ah, there we go. Okay, first question is from Nicole. The question I have is, the grant says that primarily focus on young women of color between the ages of 12 to 24 years old who are at risk, so on and so forth. Would it be more beneficial if we apply for one school or two? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the first question. Can we serve all female students of color or just Latinx and Indigenous? So again, that's something that we shared at the beginning of this and clarified, is that yes, you can serve all young women of color. The Latinx and Indigenous youth and young adults is in reference to not necessarily a separate population, because we understand there can be an overlap, but it's not a subset of women of color. So we're not saying young women of color, Latinx, and Indigenous. What we're saying is young women of color and or all Latinx and or Indigenous youth and young adults. The second question is, would it be more beneficial if we apply for one school or two? Is it okay that one is West Seattle and one is South Seattle? If just one school, what area would they prefer we target? So we do not exactly have a preference for you. It's really more about where do you want to provide services? Where do you feel like the need is most relevant? And yes, it's perfectly fine to be working with more than one school or one school, whatever you feel is going to be the most effective in order to be able to implement your program and provide services for the focus population. You're welcome, Nicole. I don't know if I'm getting the other questions.
Are there any questions others have asked at the other bidders conferences that are common that you might want to just address?
In terms of other questions that folks ask during the bidders workshops, we will be providing all of those questions as well as the responses, because I feel like we would do a much better job of responding to those questions via the FAQ. That being said, I think one of the ones that stuck out the most for folks is, would somebody score higher if they were providing services for young women of color versus doing something that was for all Latinx youth and young adults, so on and so forth? And our general response to that is, it's hard for us to necessarily say who is going to score higher, because it's not just about score, it's also how does this person, or how does your proposal fit with the rest of the proposals, and we need to be able to come up with a robust selection of competitive proposals that we feel like is going to really complement the investments that we made from the RFP to 2018 RFP. So we'll provide you with a much more articulate response, but we can't say that at this point in time. It's really hard for us to say what will score higher, because there's so many variables that we have to take into consideration. Just looking at the criteria that we outlined earlier on in this webinar would give you some sort of indication of a number of variables that we're trying to take into consideration whenever we're scoring. Allison asked, I missed the beginning of the webinar. Are you available for phone calls? Is the webinar available to view again? Yes, the webinar is recorded. You will be able to view it. Reginald and myself and any other King County staff are not available to answer questions directly. We recommend that you access the frequently asked questions within Zoom grants, or access our technical assistance consultants in order to be able to get further insight and have any particular questions asked that you were not able to present during this webinar or from the workshops. And again, the activity log will also be available in case you have any questions. And just know that whenever somebody asks a question in the activity log, the response will be provided at the FAQ. And Reginald also indicated that he can review some of the FAQ questions as well. Oh, right now. What is? Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. So still feel free to text in any more questions, or over the phone unmute yourself and ask any questions. Over the past couple webinars, or bidders conferences, we've had some questions come up, so I'll review a handful of those. A lot of the ones that I focused on answering were especially around Zoom grants, so I'll make sure I definitely touch on those. So in terms of contacting technical support, from the home screen is where you actually find their information. You don't typically find it when you're already in the application. So when you go and see the FAQ in Zoom grants, there will be an email to contact them. There will also be a toll-free number where you can contact them. So again, you can find that on the home screen by clicking, their contact button, but we'll also have it in the FAQ for you. In terms of copying and pasting, one thing that has come up that we put in the FAQ is when you're working on your application, ideally like in Microsoft Word or some other platform, when you copy and paste into Zoom grants, it won't take bold or parentheses or numbering or different fonts, etc. It's just going to copy in as plain text. Also, when you copy and paste over, the word count sometimes will be different. So make sure that not only are you saving your work in a different space and having it in plain text, but putting it over into the application early on to ensure that the word count is lined up. Also, in terms of submitting your application, hypothetically, let's say you submit your application next week. You do have the ability to go back into your application and make updates. And same thing, if you want to submit your application early, but one of the folks who are working on the application with you want to go in and make some updates, they can do so as well. If for whatever reason you're not getting the response from our TAs or from Zoom grants that you're looking for, definitely contact us in the activity log as soon as possible. We really want to make sure that any type of technical difficulties or confusion that there is, we take care of early as possible. So please review the RFP in full as early as possible. So that way, if there's anything you need to ask us, sooner than later, we're able to take care of that for you. In terms of the indicators, there are a handful of indicators on our application that Sarah J also reviewed, and you may be thinking to yourself, do I need to move the needle on all of these? Do I need to be impacting all of these? Are all these going to be on the contract, etc.? When it does come to that next phase, the main things that we'll be looking at are there increased participant success in education by completing their secondary credentials, getting a diploma or equivalent, or are students and young adults remaining in the secondary school and making progress towards graduation? So education in summary. Are you increasing participants' enrollment into post-secondary education or placement into employment? So as we said, 12 to 24, if someone's not in school, their goal more than likely, there's a good chance they'd be moving towards employment. So are you helping them move towards staying in school, getting back into school, or moving towards employment? And then lastly, decreased involvement in the juvenile justice system and a reduction of young people being convicted of a new crime during program participation. So as Zach mentioned earlier, in terms of eligibility, the youth and young adults would be either at risk, involved, or have been involved with the system, and we'd be pushing towards those three goals on top of any other goals that your program is moving towards. In terms of any grantees that are currently awarded for BSK funds, regardless of what strategy area, you are able to apply for these funds. So, and same thing, if you have any questions, you still have the ability to utilize the TA and the activity log to reach out to us. So at this point, I don't see any other messages coming through the text section. Nor do we have anyone coming over the phone. But as I mentioned, all these FAQs will be online. Oh.
Hi, can you hear me over the audio?
Yes, let me turn you up a little bit. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought I'd try this. Allison from Quantum Martial Arts. We're a very small organization. Is there any consideration for your current budget and the amount that you would be awarded?
So are you saying would we allow for folks to apply for more than the allotted amount?
Well, not the more than the allotted amount, but if we're a $80,000 organization, we would be asking for more than our annual budget to try to gain capacity. Is that something you're expecting small nonprofits to do?
So with the awards that we have made, we have not expected any type of match or folks to come into the process with a specific budget amount already. So yeah, it is perfectly fine for you to go through the application process, and when you're asking for funds, have those funds go towards increasing capacity, bringing on staff, so on and so forth. The end goal is, as you're applying, does your budget reflect the program that you were trying to provide? So yes, if you need more funds to provide the program that you are saying you would provide, that is just
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Because some grantees say, will not grant more than X% of your current budget or something like that. So I just making sure that that's not the case here.
Thank you. So it kind of sounds like, and to make sure I'm catching you correctly, in some applications, the question is, in some applications they require you not to request more than your current operating budget.
Right.
And my answer is no, we do not have that requirement. The amount that you request should be the amount that aligns with the program that you plan to provide.
Right. Because we'd be asking for budget to add a staff member.
Yes, that is perfectly fine. Folks that are looking to apply, we are looking for you to include staff members, their salaries. So on the salary tab in Zoom Grants, you would put the position title, you would put the percentage of the work that they'd be doing with that program, and how much of their salary would be coming from Best Starts for Kids. So in this example, if you'd be hiring a brand new staff using these funds, you would put that staff's position title, that they'd be doing 100% work with BSK, and they'd be 100% funded through BSK.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I got one more if no one else has it. I know there's a pat answer for this, but are partnerships preferred or single organization applications? Is there an obvious preference?
Okay, so the question is there a preference between collective applications and non-collective applications? There's no preference. What we prefer is for folks to, when you apply, make sure that you are putting down what you intend to do, and you show that the capacity that you can do that work, and that you are connected to the community to doing that work. So if a collective application allows you to do that better, then that would make sense. And if you are just fine doing that as an individual, that makes sense as well. So no, we do not have a preference. We just ask that everyone puts their best foot forward as they see fit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions online, via text, or anyone over the phone? Don't forget that you need to unmute for us to be able to hear you. And also, if you have a question that's specific to a certain staff, feel free to also to have them come up and answer your question. Hold for about another 30 seconds before we move to closing out for remaining questions. Want me to close out? Okay. All right, y'all. So thank you very much for tuning in with us. You'll be able to see the recording of this shortly. If there was any aspect of this video that you couldn't hear or that didn't come out clear, please let us know through the activity log of the application. Also, if you just want to take a look at the application, but you don't necessarily want to get into applying and creating an account, you can still go onto the BSK blog and click the link and just do a preview of the application as well. Also, if you want to start the application and you don't finish through, no worries. There's no penalty for that. That's just fine to move forward with the process as you see fit. All right. Well, you all have a good evening. And again, thank you.